Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again. I really appreciate you watching. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about state. Now, state is a term that we use in the sort of power, speed, endurance and art of breath ecosystem quite a bit. If you're not familiar with this term, it's basically the intersection of our biology and our behavior and how our reaction to our environment has this sort of cyclical effect on the way that our bodies and our minds change, and then again how we would respond to the environment. So I want to use a story to sort of illustrate some things that we can do to help modulate our state and be more mindful of what's going on around us, how we're reacting things, and then what we can do to kind of intercept these behaviors and redirect them in more productive ways. And so a little anecdote from my life is that when I was a kid, my parents were split up and I lived in Virginia and my dad lived in New York. And so I used to travel quite a bit, 3 or 4 times a year. I was flying and I was really comfortable with it. And if you've flown and been around kids, they have no sense of mortality whatsoever. And so they're really happy. They don't care. The takeoff doesn't bother most kids. Turbulence, no big deal. They just watch a movie. They don't care. And this was sort of my reaction, throughout my entire childhood, my teen years, and I flew quite regularly all the way through the time I was about 18, and then more and more sparsely through my early and mid 20s, and then I had about a 2 or 3 year break where I didn't travel at all. I hadn't been on an aircraft for a couple of years, and my wife and I went away, and I had real serious anxiety once we were in our seats about taking off. And I had this whole story that I worked up about it, and I had basically what amounted to like a small panic attack. And this sort of set the stage for me having this slight reactivity going on in the system, even after I sort of cognitively got over the fact that, hey, everything would be okay. I would have this underlying thing going on in the system where basically my state would shift towards pretty high sympathetic as a reaction to what the aircraft was doing. And this kept going on for some years where I would sort of be able to mitigate the effects of my nervousness through some positive tools, some less than positive tools. For me, I would use distractions like I might read during takeoff, or I would just try to put my mind somewhere else. I even used some breathing techniques, which did prove to be useful, but they're limited, and I'll talk about why I think that is in a little bit. And if you travel with any frequency, you see this in people a lot. They do all kinds of things to mitigate the interior stress that's going on. People use alcohol quite a bit, even in the morning when they're flying or preparing to fly. People use sedatives. They try to distract themselves immediately. You can see how tight they're gripping the seats. And this is something that I was noticing somewhat in myself, is that during takeoff or landing or during some turbulence, my body would become really tense. And that's a sympathetic reaction to what's going on in the environment. But it's a poor use of energy, because no amount of tension in my body is going to alter what happens to the aircraft and would actually limit my ability to respond well should I be required to be responsive in some positive way. So it's just really an energy waste. Now, one thing I did find useful was, instead of distracting myself with a book or a movie or something like that right away, or putting my mind somewhere else, I did begin doing some breath work as my focus got more and more into that route. And what it really helped me do, and something that's really important that sort of shifted the way this story goes, is it made me more aware of what it is that I was doing, how reactive I was actually being, and whether or not that was necessary. And now we know from some newer research that's coming out that even just paying attention to your breath is a really important step towards recoordinating the reactivity that's going on in the system. So I didn't use any fancy breath protocol. I wasn't doing anything crazy. I just started to pay attention to my breathing, how I was reacting. And if you start doing this, you may notice that you're holding your breath slightly, or that you're breathing a little bit more than you need to, because the reality is, on an airplane, you're seated, and the metabolic requirements for sitting are actually quite low. And so if you're breathing heavily, you're holding your breath, or your muscles are tight, it's a waste of energy, and it only perpetuates a cycle of reactivity. Now, after a while, what I decided was that I also didn't want to be attached to using breath work in order to have a pleasant flight experience, because that could also become a crutch or a hiding place. Now, when you're in initial stages of trying to deal with something that makes you very stressed or reactive, I think it's a really good tool and a very powerful one. But ultimately for myself, what I decided was that I didn't want to have to rely on anything in order to make that a pleasant experience for me ultimately. So what I did instead was I put myself in the center of those situations without any distraction. So during takeoff, after I had done breath work and learned how to calm myself down for a while, I said, you know what, the next step here is just to fully experience what is happening. I'm just gonna allow myself to feel whatever it is that I feel, not put any label on it, allow myself to go through the process. So now when there's turbulence, if I notice myself getting a little stiff, I make myself relax. Maybe I'll take one nice deep breath, relax my body, and sort of give into the whole thing. And I notice that I don't have to manipulate my sense of well-being nearly as much. I'm not nearly as tired when I get off aircraft. I'm not nearly as fatigued by travel because I haven't been having this reactive cycle during the time that I'm traveling. And so the point here is that breath work can be a really powerful tool when you're starting, especially for awareness, right? And so that's one of the most potent things I got out of that situation, was that my breath work in that case, yes, of course it manipulated my reaction and muscle tension and all that stuff, but really it just made me more aware of how I was reacting to the environment and whether or not that was necessary. And then what I wanted to do from that point forward. Was this really a good use of my energy? And so now I'm relaxed enough in these situations that I can learn from the experience of what's going on around me. I notice things that other people are doing. I'm much more acutely aware of other human behavior. But also, if I do decide to read or do some work, I can actually fully engage my cognitive resources instead of just staring at the page because it's just a distraction. Because when I'm just doing something like that as a distraction, I'm not actually absorbing the information anyway. It's just a thing for me to stare at while I try not to think about what's happening. So again, if we can use some tools like breath work to relax into the experience, then we have a much better perspective. We're much more aware of what's going on, and it makes it easier to divert our state into behavior patterns that are far more productive and helpful, both for ourselves and for those around us. So I hope that was helpful. Next time you're on an airplane, if you find it stresses you out, just take a deep breath, let your body relax, and enjoy the ride. See you guys next time.